So after we've defined the different constructs in our question, the key pieces and what we know we mean by those, we want to think about squeezing this into frameworks that help us understand our research question and make sure we've got all the key pieces. So if you're asking a question about the effectiveness of an intervention, or your aim is to understand the effectiveness of a certain intervention, your question and the format of your question may look a little different than if you are interested in prevalence or a population's experience as they're receiving that intervention. And the link here will take you to a table from an article that I find very helpful. There are a lot of different examples or options for choosing or aligning the aim or the type of your question to models and formats and frameworks for questions. But I like this one because it's very clear, and especially in a context like this, it's easy for you to see. Sometimes this effectiveness may be called a treatment question or a therapy question. So don't take these in very firm ways. Use them as models to think, well, what is the aim of my question, right? Am I trying to get a sense of etiology when an exposure creates a certain kind of outcome? Or am I really, is this really a prognosis question? Or am I really trying to get a sense of mapping all the methods that have been used here? So a guide like this can help you then think through how your question maybe should be structured and what the important pieces are in that question. And that's this format piece, which is often in the systematic review world considered frameworks. So frameworks are guides or structures for questions that help researchers make sure they've included all of the key parts in their question. And there are a lot of these. I've grabbed this image from the University of London, where I think they've done a nice job of pulling together some of the most common frameworks, but there are so many. As you look around online, you'll see there are frameworks that are very varied. Here you can see probably the most common is an intervention or effectiveness question, often uses a PICO framework. You'll see there are several different frameworks here that aren't on this guide. I've never found one list of all the frameworks I've ever seen. So use these as tools to help you think through what's important to you. You may take a piece of this framework and a piece of this framework, which can be okay as long as you explain what you did and why, and it still leads you to a research question that you feel good about. I'm going to talk about PICO for a minute, though, because it's the most common, partly because intervention systematic reviews are one of the most common types of systematic reviews. In a PICO question, there's often a part of the question that gets at the patient or population, sometimes problem, but especially the population. Then there's an element of the question that gets at the intervention that's happening, often a comparison group for that intervention or that population, and then an outcome. And this then can lead to a question. This sets you up to ask a question where you make sure you've described each of these elements in that question. Down at the bottom, you'll see sometimes people add an S or a T to capture certain study designs. This is particularly the case when folks are doing a meta-analysis with their intervention, where it's very quantitative, and the goal is to only synthesize data that capture the same kind of outcome in the same population in the same kind of ways. So a T or an S can be a very common addition to PICO in the health sciences, and in the social sciences, a little less so. In the social sciences, they may drop the comparison. There may be that there aren't things that are a comparison, or the interest is really digging into outcomes and themes in a not so rigid way. The outcomes could be a bigger set of outcomes rather than a very specific one. So here's another example that's often used in more qualitative settings where the research question includes a population piece and exposure, which can also be an intervention and an outcome piece.